and this is Off the Rack.
Your monthly podcast on what we can't stop talking about in the world of fashion, art, and culture.
Woo!
Yay!
Episode
Second
2.
I know, I'm so excited. It's like our baby is like growing.
I know. I can't believe we're doing this for a second episode. How are you doing? How are you feeling?
I'm good. Honestly, I think because school is over. And I also don't know if I should be feeling any better because nothing's really changed. But
Yeah.
I'm feeling a bit more positive.
Yeah.
I'm like a bit more ready to take next steps because I'm moving soon. So
Ooh,
yeah,
exciting.
very exciting.
And
How
the
are you?
weather's getting nice. I'm doing well. Like I think like having some sunshine, being able to be outside a bit more has been great. I think as much as this time of civil unrest, for lack of a better like term, has been sort of like jarring, I think it's so necessary. And I think had Corona never happened, we wouldn't have the time to sit and pull apart like all of these ideologies that we've been sitting with our entire life.
Yeah.
That you and I know that, like, you know, in our circles we talk about like dismantling patriarchy and like capitalism and things like that, but to have the entire country talk about these things at the same time and actually, okay, how do we do that? Like defund the police. Oh, that's something you can do. Like we don't actually need prisons. Oh snap. Like so that's been really exciting. Today for our fashion news, I kind of want to, in that same vein, talk through all of this like performative activism that's happening from all these brands. So if you guys don't know, I mean, I don't know what country you live in, you should know what's happening in the world with the murder of George Floyd that sort of like sparked this entire civil unrest movement. I don't like to say the Black Lives Matter movement just because it feels very, Black Lives Matter, the organization feels very like corporate, like I don't know, you know what I'm saying? I don't know what y'all doing with y'all money for real. Like, but a lot of these brands had to sort of like quickly figure out, okay, like everyone is talking about Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. Like, what can we say right now? The problem I found, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is a lot of these brands jumped the gun. Like they didn't take the time to say, okay, like what are our internal policies? How are the Black people in our organization feeling? Do we even have any? Have we ever posted Black people on our page? Is this going to come out of left field? Like, what are we actually going to do long term that's not like put a Black square up or whatever? Like, what organizations are we going to donate to? How are we going to implement real change?
I agree with that. I also think though it's kind of hard because I know some brands that I follow, when they would post stuff, I would go into or they would post stuff that makes them like Glossier, and who else? Someone else said something that made a lot of sense. And I would go to their comments and people would say, yeah, this is good, but you know, it took you so long. And, you know, I feel like it's a double-edged sword where you want to act quickly, but you also want to make sure you're acting appropriately and not just like putting a Band-Aid on a giant festering sore. So, but I agree. I think some people did act really hastily, especially people whose history is now coming to the surface and will be being like, outed for
the shade
racist.
So I want to, like, what brands in your mind did it right? Like for me, I think Glossier, which if you're unfamiliar, it's a makeup brand. It's very white, for lack of a better term. It's very like, oh my God, I don't wear makeup, but like, look, I put on like glitter on my eyelids, like Akua. And they decided to not only donate funds to different grassroots organizations, but they decided to launch a fund for Black-owned beauty brands, which I think like within the world of Glossier, that makes sense. That's not super left field for them to do that.
Exactly.
So I appreciated that. Harlem Fashion Row, which is a Black organization based in New York City, they decided to launch a nonprofit called Icon 360 to aid designers of color impacted by COVID, which again, Harlem Fashion Row was created for Black designers for real. So they didn't really have to go out of their way to prove their solidarity for Black people because that's who they are. I'm trying to think of other brands. Ben and Jerry's kind of like is doing something cool. I mean, they're not fashion, but I like that they're using their platform to educate folks on all of these things. What other brands in your head are doing it well?
I liked, and see, it's also tough. I don't know. It's a question of also what is right. But what felt really right for me was I follow The Break on
Shout outs to Break.
Instagram. It's like and they've been posting. I think they've always been very inclusive. I found because I interned there and I found their projection of what their image is to be true to what it was actually what it felt like when I was there. And they've been posting a lot of Black owned brands. They've always used Black models, and it feels like it just felt natural. And
Yeah.
and like some people I know smaller businesses can't really do monetary donations as much,
Right.
but I find that when they're genuine expressions of wanting to show up for the community and wanting to give people places where they can support, I think that felt good. And I felt a lot of smaller brands and brands that are owned by one person will kind of donate their proceeds, and I think that's really meaningful, especially when it's smaller businesses, because the larger businesses aren't doing it. So
Nope.
yeah.
I fully agree. I think some brands, I guess we can talk about this, right? Some brands that I think that have done it all the way wrong. Reformation being one. Like, girl, you're not finna tell me what Black people you have at your team. Like, please, I beg, like, leave me alone.
Yeah. So sad.
Bando, which is like one of those cutesy, like, girly brands. I believe their CEO actually stepped down because of the backlash from the staff. Again, like, you have to be, the internet will get you out of here so quick. Like, you will blink and you'll be out of here. So it would behoove you to make sure that the Black people in your organization are happy before you come at me talking about like Black Lives Matter, man repeller.
Oh my gosh.
We here. And also, like, what I don't appreciate about man repeller now is that, like, they made up one statement, right? And then, like, they got dragged in their comments, and then they made another statement like, I'm sorry I wasn't like clear and detailed about what we're actually going to do. But in that statement, they didn't really say what they're going to do as an organization either, so they got dragged again. And then now they're doing these weird, like, flooding of Black content, like this series about focusing on Black designers, which is dope, but you're a fashion platform and you have been for years. Why does it take Black death for you to think like, oh yeah, let's feature designers that aren't white and rich? Like, all of the staff writers on that team, I don't know them personally, right? Like, but just from the tone of their articles, y'all and you and I are not the same. We're just not.
And I think
it feels disingenuous just to throw a bunch of Black content on your site.
And seeing in their comments under like these two articles that you talked about, longtime readers of Man Repeller who have noticed that Black writers haven't been able to stay at Man Repeller for very long.
Yes.
There was a photographer who I really loved, I think Sabrina Santiago, who was, I think, laid off right before COVID, and she was on the page, and she also talked about her experience there. And
Crystal, who's a great writer, she used to work at Man Repeller, and I believe she got furloughed during COVID. Like, again, like, y'all have to be careful when y'all doing that kind of stuff, because it's going to be hard to come back from, especially since everyone is still very much at home. We still have time to, like, all right, like, I don't actually need to support Man Repeller. I don't really. So I think the takeaway from this is to make sure your politics match what you're saying to the outside world. Like, it is not enough for you to say, and also, like, I don't care to bully brands into saying Black Lives Matter. Like, I already know at this point where you stand, right? Based on the content, based on the things you make, based on the way you treat your employees, based on the way you treat your factory workers. Like, I already know what your politics are. We saw some garment workers at H&M supplier factory Euro Clothing in Bangalore, India, protest the factory closing after H&M canceled orders and refused to pay for work done, right? Like, when a big retailer cancels an order from their factory, especially like H&M, which I'm sure their orders are humongous, now you just have a bunch of H&M products sitting in these factories that I can't move, and now we done had all of this work done and we're not getting paid for it. Like, that's whack. Like, you can fully afford to pay your employees. And we know right now India is being hit with COVID-19 super hard, and their healthcare system is buckling under the pressure of all of these COVID cases. So like, that's super whack. You shouldn't be shopping at H&M, period.
Anyway, yeah.
Like, and again, I say this from a privileged space that I can go into any store and find my size. But if you can find your size, if you're someone who is between size 0 and size maybe 12, stop shopping at H&M. Like, it's just like, go to a thrift store instead. If you don't have the funds to spend on like some of these independent brands, H&M is not it.
And I think by virtue of H&M's trendier nature, the stuff that is already made is not gonna make sense.
Nope, it's
next
gonna look
year
stupid.
when it's like it's gonna be all like, I mean, neon is out now, but when it was neon and snake print, when those were in, like, it's all gonna be that stuff.
Yeah, it's gonna be mad snakeskin bodysuits.
Yeah.
The girls are not into that. So today we are talking about African luxury brands, what that means. We just wanted to make sure that when we're talking about fashion, that we're coming from a very 360 global perspective. And for us, it is super important to talk about the continent of Africa as a major player in the fashion space. My parents are from Jamaica, so I don't have a direct connection to Africa, but I am still very much blackity black. And Akua.
Yes, I am half Jamaican and half Ghanaian, but I know there are a lot of similarities between the two because my parents talk about it all the time. So I have a vested interest in this topic, and I'm kind of not scared, but I'm worried I won't do it justice. But listen, I think I believe in myself. So.
And we encourage you guys to do your own research. Like, we are not the be all end all folks about fashion, about African fashion, about luxury fashion. This is sort of like our take on everything.
Yeah. So I think, and this is going to sound very cliche, or the concept is going to be very cliche, but I think we start with the definition.
Yeah.
Like any good essay. So I was reading around on the internet, and some of the definitions I found of what other people think African luxury is. So one is the current definition of African luxury takes pride in made in Africa and values the artisanal, ethical, and handmade. So there's the made in Africa aspect, which is one thing, and ethical and handmade, which is another thing. The other one talks about quality products being made in Africa. So there's also the made in Africa aspect with continental labor and imbued with the African culture and heritage. One thing that is really different and new about African luxury is its cultural identity. So there is the made in Africa aspect, there's the handmade craftsmanship aspect, and there's the cultural identity aspect, which I think are the three main things that stand out for me. I think I shy away from African luxury having to have a cultural identity as being African luxury. I don't know. I think it's just too easy, and it puts people in a box. I feel like to be defined as African luxury, it has to have African cultural identity.
And like, what does that even look like?
Does that
like, because African culture, Africa is a continent, like, with a bajillion different countries, with a bajillion different bajillion was me saying like, girl, no, I'm not trying to mess it up.
Trying to think of myself.
Several different cultural identities, several different languages, like I agree to your point. Like, we don't want to box in African brands and like it has to look a certain way. It has to be like handmade. It has to be using natural fibers. It has to have, I don't know, some sort of print on it.
Yeah, I think to that point, I think when I think of African luxury, for me, it means luxury that's designed by people who identify as African. Just like, I think that's, what do you think? I mean,
I agree. I think that, to your point, right, I try to be as mindful as possible and not thinking African luxury has to look like Brother Vellies, right? Like this sort of like natural, bohemian, like earthy aesthetic, because African people are very diverse. They have very diverse influences, very diverse backgrounds, and a garment that Givenchy or Louis Vuitton makes can very much be African luxury had it been designed by an African designer, right?
Exactly.
So I think it's super important for us as a fashion loving people to allow African brands to evolve and allow them to tell you who they are and stop trying to impose your ideas of what African garb and African fabrications and African silhouettes should look like.
Yeah, and this is also not to say African luxury shouldn't have a cultural identity, but that shouldn't be the a requirement, I think.
Yeah. Because I think like every time, if I were to say African luxury, right, to someone, they're thinking, okay, there's maybe raffia, maybe there's like a wrap skirt or like something that is very traditional.
Yeah.
And I think that is super important for us to start to talk about the continent of Africa the way that we talk about the continent of Europe in terms of fashion, because
Yeah.
we don't think like European fashion. Like, I mean, obviously we think like we have certain ideas of what Europeanness looks like when it comes to clothing, but we kind of let the continent and all of the various countries and the various cities define what it means to be luxury. And we don't look at a designer from Italy like, why are you designing a winter puffer jacket? Like,
Yeah.
that's not your aesthetic. Like, you're a
Exactly.
European designer. Like, you can't
Yeah.
do that. And I think it is important for us to allow African designers to do that as well. And I think
Yeah.
it's important for us to start having conversations about the continent of Africa in terms of luxury, right? Like, when we think of, and I don't want to say we because it's very reductive, but when folks think about African fashion, they're thinking about things that you can get on 125th, like their dashikis and the kente cloths and things that you're wearing to Afropunk and like your mom's gele. Like, you're thinking about things that you wear to traditional African functions or like to festivals or street fairs or things like that, which is fine. Like, I think those things are beautiful,
Of course.
but I do think that like you don't have to wear a dashiki to be wearing African fashion. Like
Yeah.
Hanifa, who we talk about on this podcast a lot, is Congolese, I believe, Congolese, and her clothing is very much an African luxury brand because she is African. She pulls influences from the Congo into her clothing. Her last collection was the Pink Label Congo, all about the Congo, and those clothes can be worn by anybody, right? You can wear that to work, you can wear that to brunch, you can wear that to like the flex, like whatever.
Yeah.
So that's kind
Yeah.
of where I stand on it.
I think also to that point about anyone being able to wear it, I think with expecting African luxury to have a cultural identity, I think then there become questions of appropriation and questions of who can wear African luxury that has an African cultural identity. So I think, yeah, that's a limitation that's put on it sometimes. Also, African designers can have different identities beyond their Africanness, which is another point.
100%. I
Like,
think that is actually like, let's sit with that point for a little bit. I think that just as Black Americans or Black Afro-Caribbeans can have varying identities, like if I was born in Ghana as a queer person or as a disabled person or as a woman or any of these other identities, they're going to influence my designs just as much as me being born in this particular neighborhood,
yeah,
city, country will.
yeah,
So I think that is actually very, very, very important. And it's also, to me, like, I think it's a bit annoying to force African designers to like constantly put out African clothes, right? Like, if I don't want to infuse any of my culture into my collection this season, if I want to just put out all Black, like utilitarian wear and that's it, I'm not thinking about no like deeper meaning, historical context. I just want to put out cool clothes. I should be given the space to do
yeah,
so.
yeah.
So, what are some problems facing the African luxury industry now in your mind?
I think what you mentioned about kind of thinking about Africa and African luxury as, or African fashion at least, as more than just traditional dress and more than just like the gele, the dashiki. that kind of thing, that like, you know, the Kaban slit. So I think Africa needs to be thought of more as a place where there are skills that are very important in luxury. Like there's a heavy seamstress, tailor, custom made goods culture. Everyone has a seamstress, everyone has a tailor, everyone will get their stuff made, get their stuff altered. And I think what we see, or what people have seen in the media, doesn't really, when you go to, when you hear stories about Africa and stories about, stories about countries in Africa, there are often stories about the war or the famine,
poverty,
or the disease, or how is that? Close the door. Anyway, sorry. So so when we see or hear stories about Africa, it's usually things like that. And so I think that's a problem, where those are the only things people hear about Africa. People don't hear about the creative scene in Africa. People don't hear about artists coming out of Africa. They are more recently. I know an artist I really love performed like a set for Burberry or something on their Instagram Live, which was really cool. But it's a more recent thing where we are hearing about other stories coming from Africa. So I think that's my biggest problem. And that's, I think that's what the biggest problem is. Yeah.
As someone who's lived in Africa, right? Did you live in Ghana for any period of time?
Yeah.
Okay. And South Africa, of course. Mm-hmm. Like, talk to me about like your experience as a younger person in Africa and the creatives in Africa that you saw.
So I currently speak South Africa because I was there. I left when I was 13. So I was there from maybe 7 to 13. I was younger. But in Ghana specifically, there are a lot of creatives, and there are a lot of people who are incredibly I almost said innovative, and doing really exciting things. And I think there's also a lack of resources and a lack of access to resources that people need to, one, kind of grow their creativity, to kind of start the things that they want to do. They want to start to show their creativity, or to even know that there are avenues for the creativity that they have. I think the creative industry is developing more, though. There are more fashion brands. There's more respect for fashion. There's more respect for art, photography specifically. I think the creative industry is growing. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it did. I think back to the original question of the problems that African luxury brands are facing now. To your point, right, infrastructure and being able to produce your garments at an affordable price in your respective countries is an issue. I think that Africa is lacking in terms of fashion publications, fashion press. Like, the only time you see like an African designer being featured on a major fashion publication like a Vogue is if they're doing like a roundup of African designers to watch. Mm-hmm. And that only happens if like a Thebe Magugu goes to Paris and shows in Paris. Like, you don't see these major publications taking the time and putting it in their budget to go to these countries. Yeah. You don't see the retailers putting in their budget to travel 10 plus hours or whatever the flight is to go visit these brands and buy these brands for their stores, which is why, unfortunately, a lot of these brands are sort of left out of the mix of major luxury fashion retailers, the Essences, the opening ceremonies, like all the girls. I think just as much as these bigger retailers are willing to travel to other countries, I think it is very important that they figure out a way to travel to Africa, especially these major cities, Lagos, Accra, Cape Town, like these are huge hubs. Like, we're not talking about like a small village here. Like, Accra has like some of the most beautiful tailoring I've ever seen, like designers from Accra. Like, there's no reason why you can't figure out a way to take time to go to Africa. And I think Vogue needs a Vogue Africa. You need at least a Vogue South Africa. Like, there's Vogue in if I'm not mistaken, every other continent, correct? With the exception of
Yeah.
Antarctica. Like, girl, I don't know who she is. We don't care about her. Is there a Vogue Australia? There has
Yes.
to be. Yeah, and there's a Vogue Asia. There's a
Yeah.
Vogue. Yeah, there's no reason why we don't have a major. And that's the thing. I always struggle with that idea, right? Because like I don't know that Vogue would even be able to tell African stories. So maybe it's not even like a need of a Vogue, because I want to be wary in looking for white people to validate the work that we're doing, but a major fashion publication that is a major player in the space to be about Black African design. And it, because what happens is when you have African designers being written about in all of these other publications, they get super othered because it's like, oh my God, you're from Africa. Like talk to me. They do a lot of explaining because they have to, versus like if there was a major fashion publication. And please, if anyone listening is from the continent and knows of some really interesting fashion sites, not fashion sites because we kind of know a few, but fashion publications specifically that are there, please let us know. But yeah, African fashion publication that centers African designers doesn't have to do all of the explaining of like, whoa, like you're a designer and you're from Lagos? Like that's crazy.
Exactly. And with the like being othered as an African designer is, I've lost my train of thought, is like the whole idea of having to overcome, you know, coming out of Africa, which is based on the media, which is, you know, poor and like sad and just so we've talked about kind of African designers being able to exist as just designers, and not necessarily because they're African designers. That shouldn't be the only thing. I think also what I spoke to my mom a bit because she worked at an ad agency in Ghana, and she talked about how the lack of data collection can sometimes be a difficult, I guess this speaks to access as well, but something that designers and brands could struggle with in Africa. If you want to start a luxury brand in Africa, the data on how much households are spending on clothing and how much households are spending in certain places is difficult to collect because I don't really think there's the infrastructure that you mentioned, infrastructure for that yet. And the people that are getting that information are the big brands like a Unilever or a Nestle and so design, I don't know if maybe there are people who don't know if there is a market for African luxury in Africa because they don't have access to that information. I mean, that being said though, there are a lot of millionaires on the continent.
Yeah,
and
Africa is such a wealthy continent. There's so much wealth on the continent of Africa.
Exactly. So it's not a question of, I don't think it's a question of there not being a market. I think it's a question of people maybe not knowing there's a market, or maybe not knowing how to access the market, because there is a lot of classism in Africa, or knowing how to find people who are in that market who they can speak to, who can give them insight. So I think there are a lot of different things that come into play there.
What do you want to see in the future of African luxury?
It's a good question. I think, as you mentioned, I'm going to use Vogue Africa as like just a jump off point. But I think Vogue Africa, you're right, is problematic in a couple ways. I think also to be able to try and cover 53, I might be wrong, 53, 52, 50 plus countries.
50 plus, period.
Yeah, 50 plus countries is difficult. But I do want more media in Africa. And I would like to see African writers and African photographers and African editors and publishers get together to, I know South Africa does have they had a Cosmo South Africa that might have just closed, but I know South Africa has a platform for that. But I want to see more media in other parts of Africa. I wish people could find African luxury more easily, I guess, which speaks to the initial point, but retailers that sell African luxury, outside of Africa, inside of Africa, like an opening ceremony or like a platform where people could see African fashion easily. What about you? What do you think as someone with a background?
I think for me, the media component is a huge huge component, because in order for us to look at brands that are made in Africa as luxury, we have to reframe the way we look at the entire continent across the board. Like, it is like, and their African creatives based in America are doing an amazing job of shining a light on Africa and all the creativity that comes out of the continent. I think with the influence of Afrobeat and Burna Boy and all of these huge artists that are getting major looks in big cities like New York and then in London, like, that is important in changing the game. It's sort of like when dance hall became mainstream in America, you start to look at Jamaica slightly differently. It's important for us to start to talk about Africa not as a like third world space, like as a thriving community of amazingly gifted, talented creatives across the board. We need more African designers. I'm going to take that back. We don't need more African designers. We need more visibility on the African designers that already exist.
Yeah.
We need all of these major platforms that can afford to shine a light and not other them. Like, it's not necessary for you to be like, and they're an African designer. Like, just talk to them and profile them as you would any other up and coming designer. I think that having major streaming platforms have African film, like I think Blood and Water, if you haven't seen it on Netflix, is such a solid show, just to see like African youth, South African, and the show is based on South African young people, just to see young people exist in Africa and they're not like starving. They're not like, they don't got no flies on their face. Like, they're living their best life. They're dealing with things that I deal with, is important. And I think that for us as a community, you shouldn't shop African brands to support Black people. It should be like, that stuff is cool. Like,
just part of what you do.
It's just part of what you do. It's not, and I love that people are starting to support Black businesses more. But I think in the conversation of fashion, it goes beyond that. Like, all these African brands are making cool things. Like, I'm not just supporting them out of pity or supporting them out of obligation. I'm supporting them because I'm just buying cool things. Like, when I shop any of these other girls, like, I'm not supporting them. Like, I'm not supporting Telfar when I buy his bags, right? I just like the bags.
Bag,
I just want a Telfar bag, baby. I got my notifications on every time they drop. I
Yo,
just bought a new one. I just bought a pink one.
So fast. It's crazy.
They're gonna Telfar gonna have my whole money soon.
Literally.
I have all my notifications on. I'm waiting for the pool blue to come back. I need the pool blue.
Pool is cute.
So nice.
I think it's been nice. I don't know if we need more of it, but I think it's been nice to see African people in the media who are at larger publications. So like an Edward and Info, like an Ibrahim Kamara, because they are in, and that's an easy, I mean, publications shouldn't take that as an easy escape and just say, oh, we have a Black person or we have an African person on the, but I think it's a good place because they have background and they know other people in the circles, and they, you know, will host events there, or they will get shoots done there, or, so I think it's nice that that's happening in a way, starting to happen.
Yeah, I agree. We actually had the pleasure of speaking with the founder of the Folklore, Amira, and the Folklore is actually an online retail concept operating out of New York City and Cape Town. So they stock high-end and emerging designers from Africa and the diaspora, and they also serve as a cultural hub for contemporary brands, artists, and creatives. So not only do they have the retail side, if you are just a consumer looking to shop brands based in Africa, made in Africa, and the diaspora at large, but if you are a retailer and you're like, yo, like, I want to start stocking more brands from Africa, I don't even know where to start. They also have the wholesale showroom component of them, which I think is super duper smart. They sort of make everything easy for you. And I think that we need to, I don't want to use the word support, we need to start shopping on the Folklore the way that we shop at Essence. Like, it's very, very, very important. So let's go to our conversation with Amira. So today we have an incredible guest featured today, and it is the founder of the Folklore, and I'm going to have her introduce herself right now.
Hi, my name is Amira Rasool. I'm the founder and CEO of The Folklore. The Folklore is an e-commerce distribution company that delivers luxury and African designer apparel and accessories from luxury African designer brands. So we have men's and women's apparel, accessories, and lifestyle products, so homewares, and we source from over 10 different countries, but we honestly select people from the diaspora as well as the continent. We originally started in September 2018 as an e-commerce platform. We have since expanded to offer wholesale services. So we do operate as a wholesale showroom, and we also act as a consultant for these brands where we do put them in positions to get them partnerships with international companies. You can find us at shopthefolklore.com and follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at The Folklore.
Amazing. I know Akua had a couple questions that she wanted to ask you.
Yes. So I'm going to start with the first question, which is kind of the first question we're going to have in the podcast as well. What do you define as African luxury?
So I don't actually define African luxury. I let the designers define what, African luxury means to them. Of course, when people think of luxury, they're thinking of the price point. They're thinking of, maybe the way that something is made, and they're thinking of the fabrics that are being used, the process that, goes into producing those pieces. But, I find that with Africa, just like, every other country, every other continent, there is, there's a different interpretation of certain things, and luxury, I think, is one of them. And so me being born in America, me not even being able to trace my roots back to the continent, I'm cautious of speaking on behalf of these brands. And, even though I've, constantly talking to them, and, I've learned a lot. I lived in South Africa for 2 years when I was starting this. But at the end of the day, the Folklore is providing a platform for these brands to define what luxury is themselves. We, of course, we select our designers and the products based off of, the Folklore's brand image and our idea of luxury, but that does not, define what Africa's idea of luxury is. So really just allowing these brands to tell their story, which is, what Folklore is, passing down different customs, through oral traditions, these folk tales that, really make up our history, because it hasn't been documented in the same way that Western history has been documented. And so we are, creating that platform that not only allows designers to, document their experience, and then also, actually make money off of their skills, but also be able to provide, different photographers, stylists, artists, interior designers, architects with that platform, and also opportunities to work with us.
Well, I like that idea of letting people define it for themselves. I think it is really difficult, because you mentioned, I think earlier, that because it's an emerging industry.
Yeah.
So based on the experience you have, the experience with brands, and the experience having a platform like yours in the US, what do you think the fashion industry can do to support African brands, African luxury brands, let me say, outside of platforms like yours? So
one thing that they can do is to make it so that we're not the only ones selling a lot of these designers, actually stocking them in their stores, not, testing them out on consignment, giving them that same, opportunity that they give the new person, the new American designer, or the new, Parisian designer, really giving these brands the opportunity. So often, designers, retail buyers aren't going to fly to the continent to actually, look at collections. South Africa's a 16-hour flight from New York. Lagos, all of those places, it's not at the top of their mind. So when you do have a company like mine that is making it easy for you to actually do this, you can come in, schedule a wholesale appointment with us in New York and see these pieces. There's absolutely no reason that you can't justify not carrying these brands, particularly because these are designers that are doing things that people are not doing right now. the creativity that comes out of Africa is, primarily based on the fact that they are removed from Western, society. Of course, with the internet and TV shows and stuff, they of course, have that. But at the end of the day, they are not, people aren't coming to Africa the way that, they visit Europe. And so they're not used to seeing what these designers are doing or what these cultures are producing. So when they do produce it, it's new to these outside people. But for a lot of these brands, these are traditions that have been passed down. And then they've now taken the influence that they have gotten from the internet and television, and merging that with these traditional techniques and these traditional styles. And so it's really, just making sure that you're putting your money where your mouth is. A lot of people like to write about these designers. One thing that I find a bit problematic is when they do write about these designers, these are the 5 or these are the 25 African designers. Absolutely. Instead of continuing to include them in just general list. There shouldn't be a reason to separate them from, from the other, designers that you write about on a daily. When you're putting together a shopping list, like a listicle for your website, make sure that you have these designers included in them, because there is a place now for them to buy, for customers to buy. And in the past, some of it was understandable because these brands didn't have e-commerce platforms, but now you have 30 brands that you can select from on my website. And there are other websites out there, but mine's the best.
I 100% agree with you. I think that a lot of the times, a lot of these big fashion publications have a habit of othering these African brands, in that these are cool South African brands to follow. And the only time that they're given their own article is if they go to Paris or they show in New York, right? When Orange Culture shows in New York, Vogue is going to come. When Thebe Magugu from South Africa is showing in Paris, okay, now that's worthy of a write-up. And that's unfortunate, because the Africans, just as a whole, have been creating their own garments, their own clothes from time, like since the beginning of time. Like, what Nigerian that doesn't have their own tailor? Like, it doesn't exist
exactly
at all.
And I think one thing, and just looking outside of the fashion industry, which is controlled by predominantly white people, we need to be asking Black people what they need to be doing to support these brands. Because at the end of the day, we are the tastemakers. They have Nicki Minaj do Giuseppe Zanotti shoes and Fendi collections, and then anyone who wants to work with Beyonce, and even like at the lower level of tastemakers who aren't necessarily like huge household names, but are making a huge imprint in fashion. So we need to ask of them to be supporting these designers. Why is it that every time you're on a red carpet, you have a European designer that you're wearing? Why aren't you, and when you are supporting these designers, why aren't you actually purchasing the products? Because we're not just going to keep loaning you clothes. At the end of the day, that's not how we make any money. And then in exchange for a post, that's not, at the end of the day, we don't have that luxury that these European brands have. They can afford to do that for you. We can't. And so when it comes to support, it's not just, oh, let me borrow this, I'll tag you. It's, okay, I just spent X amount of dollars on this Gucci bag, because they're not loaning out Gucci bags to these people. Let me make sure that I spend, X amount, on this Black business, and make sure that I'm also I'm also tagging them, because at the end of the day, these are companies that as they grow, we can work together and make money together.
Something. Yeah.
So yeah, that's also something I always say. I don't like to just look externally and ask, white people for money or white people for things, because at the end of the day, we're the ones who are creating, the things that people are looking at. We're the ones who are behind so many of, the artistic movements. And so I really want to, turn it on us, and what are we going to do to support each other?
Yeah. I think that's so true. I think it's been, as much as the circumstances surrounding all the recent publicity around Black-owned brands is really unfortunate, I think it has been nice in a way to have like lists that people have made, even though it shouldn't have to be that way. It's nice to, because sometimes, because like if you go, I don't know, if you live in a predominantly white area, like I go to PW, I go to Cornell. And so sometimes the stuff that you hear about from friends or the stuff that you follow on Instagram, the stuff that you get suggested is white content, or, you know, you don't get suggested the right stuff all the time. So to have lists where you can refer to and kind of curate what else you get suggested is nice.
Yeah.
Amira, I would love to get an understanding of the process from discovering these brands to then carrying them on the site to then shipping them out to customers. Like, what does that process look like? Because that, in my mind, we're actually in the process of starting a shop, but we're in the US and all of the brands will be in the US. So the thought of like scouting brands from another continent, getting them to send product to us in America and sending it off to customers just seems like insanity. So kudos to you and your team for being able to facilitate, but I'd love to hear more about the process.
Yeah, so it's simple and complex at the same time. You know, it's buying is pretty much, you know, cut and paste, but I do have to tailor my approach to how things are done on the continent, which is a little bit different, you know. So recognizing that because this is still an emerging space, that a lot of the designers still lack resources and knowledge of how to do business at an international level, on an international level. So when I first started this, I was reaching out to people, or when I was first thinking about starting, I was reaching out to people over email. I wasn't getting any email. I wasn't getting any responses. And so I ended up quitting my job. I was working at V Magazine as their fashion coordinator. And after a year there, I quit my job after I got accepted into the University of Cape Town's master's program for African studies. And I moved to South Africa, didn't have any friends there, any family there, and just decided that I was going to meet these designers in person. I was going to travel around the continent and find these designers, talk to them about what they need from an e-commerce platform, what they need from a wholesale partner, and really fine-tune my business model based off of those interactions. And so I actually went and did the work. I went and talked to people. It was important for me to be on the ground and to hear what they need and to touch the fabrics, and to try to do that, try to build a company like this without, you know, having been on the continent. It would be super complex, and I think also disingenuous to what you're, you know, trying to do. So I would go to different local shops. I lived in Cape Town for about 2 years, on and off. I spent the bulk of that time in Cape Town, and I would go to different shops and see what designers they have there. Then I would also just look on Instagram, you know, reach out to them, go to their studios, talk to them, see the products. Went to Lagos Fashion and Design Week. Went and met with some of the designers there. Met a lot of great people there as well. And, you know, always being in Johannesburg, because Johannesburg is so lit, and I love I love Johannesburg. So, you know, going to Johannesburg and going to Maboneng Precinct and checking out the stuff that they have there. And so I'll reach out, you know, tell them what we're about. It was a little bit harder to get them on board at the beginning, but, you know, now that we've solidified our place and what we and earned a good reputation, you know, most of the time now I'm not on the continent as much. I'm back in the U.S. I go back and forth. I spend like a few weeks at a time out there. I just got back in January. I was supposed to go again, but because of COVID, that's not happening anytime soon. But I'll reach out to them over email, you know, tell them what I'm interested in partnering with them, and then I'll schedule a call with each person. And I want to know about, you know, the collections. I want to know about how they work, who they currently stocked with, all of that good stuff. Then, you know, send them the designs that I would like, the orders, what I would like to price it at, because a lot of these brands don't have, you know, US pricing yet, because they have not sold in the US. And then they produce the order, they ship it to us, and they ship it to us in New York. We photograph all of the images, put it on the website, and sell it.
Man, and
And we ship from New York. So that's the reason why we do that, is because we want to make sure that we can get things shipped out for a very like inexpensive amount. When you're shipping something from Nigeria or South Africa, just shipping one shirt is just ridiculous. Like, it's
yeah,
expensive. And so we can make sure that, primarily our customers are based in the US, but we do ship everywhere. We want to make sure that, people aren't having to pay an additional $20 for shipping and then also wait, X amount of days. So we make the process a lot easier by keeping all of the products here in New York, and we do the packing and shipping.
again, kudos to you for even thinking of this sort of idea. Kudos to you for taking the leap to not only spend time on the continent, but to engage with these designers in a real authentic way, because you didn't have to do that, right? You could have just been on Instagram, been on emails and figured it out that way. But for you to have been on the continent and figuring out, okay, look, like these designers don't have the same access to information, to resources, and how can I be a vehicle for them to get to a broader audience? I think that is something to be commended, and that is not something that we should take lightly. And I think that folks that are listening to this right now, you need to be looking at the folklore the same way that you look at Essence, the same way that you look at Total Kyle. You can't, it's important to not other these Black platforms and make it so that these are Black platforms, right? It's kind of like when we saw everyone in response to Vogue's racism putting their face on a Vogue cover, because you still aspire to whiteness in this way that is your only idea of what it means to be luxury. And it is important that if you've gone on the Folklore site, it is gorgeous. The imagery is beautiful. I've had the luxury of seeing a lot of these pieces in person, and it's not to be played with. Like, it's not at all. And I'm not someone to pump fake something. Like, there's some fly stuff there. And not only are you supporting Black artists, right, but it goes beyond support in that, like, they're just cool stuff. Like,
Yeah.
If you're a fashion person, they're just cool stuff. Why would you not want to spend your money on things that are being sourced and produced ethically and look cool?
And
so
yes, we don't have that many, we don't do that many like orders. You'll see people, you go in the shade room, who wore it best? Everybody wearing the same indie bag, and I'm just like,
yeah, it's so important that we don't other the folklore. And it is super important for me to again say this again to everyone listening. The folklore isn't a Black platform. It's not an African luxury platform. It's just a platform with luxury brands on it that happen to be from the continent of Africa. And I think it is important to frame conversations around the things that we do, just the way that we aspire to buy things from opening ceremony and all these other things. So again, something to be commended for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you discussed the problems being like lack of access, kind of lack of experience. What other problems do you think brands that are on the continent face with appealing to a wider audience, whether it's like e-commerce issues, whether it's like
lack of funding is a big one. These brands are working off of nothing when you compare it to brands here that were started at the same time or that have similar traction. There's not many places where these designers can receive or apply for capital. Venture capitalists on the continent definitely don't focus on fashion. They're all into fintech and biomedical engineers, and so and then the banks, some banks will loan to designers, but the interest rates are ridiculous. So just being able to just purchasing their clothes isn't even enough at this point. We need to make sure that investors, whether that be angel investors, whether that be VC firms, are actually looking at this potential. Because if you see that these people are doing this with this much money, imagine what they can do with real money, and then a company like the Folklore behind them to help back them, not just as a retail partner, but also as like this is how you can operate. Being able to connect them with different people can help them put together their business model. So financing is one thing. Also, production is something that needs to be fine-tuned on the continent. We do need people to come in and actually teach certain techniques that will increase the quality of the products. We need to have more production facilities available that prioritize sustainable practices and not just mass market things, because like in East Africa right now, H&M produces quite a bit of stuff now. So there's clearly that when you have a company like H&M, and there are a few other companies that recognize that producing in Africa, one, makes sense financially because the cost of living there is a lot cheaper. So, the wages are cheaper, but without actually exploiting people and having, sweatshops. I'm sure there are still plenty of people being exploited and not getting paid fair wages, but it is possible to pay people fair wages and produce for, clearly a lot less than if you produced in Europe or America. So, definitely investing in production facilities so that these brands can scale and that these brands can, continue to up their quality. And the third thing that I would mention is, as I said, there was lack of funding, lack of production spaces. I don't know, maybe it'll come back to me. But yeah, at the end of the day, there's just a lot of things that need to go into building this industry. And yeah, the risk is worth the reward. And honestly, if you look at it, it's not as risky as people think. It's just because people don't know.
They're unfamiliar.
People just, assume that it's going to be too complex. And then also, there's just so many negative images associated with Africa and doing business in Africa, and everyone pretending like Africa is the only place with politically corrupt people and with
America, hello.
and yeah, and just kind of like really stepping back and looking at yourselves and seeing if you've internalized some of these negative stereotypes and have this unconscious bias towards these people, and if that's what's really holding you back, not the fact that you think it's not going to work because of X, Y, and Z. I think that people do need to recognize that Africa is a functioning place with brilliant people. I tell people all the time, when I was at University of Cape Town and doing my master's program, I was like, nobody in America is as smart as these people. Like, I was just like, because not only do they know their own history, their own culture, they know European history and culture, they know American history and culture, they all know like 5 different languages, because there's so many different languages in South Africa, and English, just like in the UK, because they do have a similar, because they were colonized by the UK, they do have a similar education experience as people in the UK. So English and like writing is emphasized there. So like the writing there, the words that people use, I never felt so dumb. I was sitting in that class like, I was like, oh, okay, this is why they're trying to suppress y'all, because y'all are brilliant and you would be running this entire world right now. If these people had access to the things that, we have in the West, we would be in a completely different situation. Also, if they weren't, actually, what would I say? Held back for so long, and given, the head start that the people here were given instead of like the boot, we would be in a different position. So just recognizing that you have to address the unconscious bias that, you may have towards Africa and wanting to do business there and wanting to support these brands.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, just out of curiosity, most of the brands you work with, because you mentioned production, do they use factories or do they have smaller workshops that they produce in with people that
just produce smaller workshops?
Okay.
We have one brand or 2 brands that own their own factories, but most of them, I would say, just do it. It's very small teams. Some 2, some 5, some 10.
To round out this conversation, I would love to know, one, what is next for the Folklore? What are you guys working on in the midst of COVID-19 sort of doing whatever it's doing? And how do you think, rather, what are your thoughts on brands that are American brands, but go over to Africa to find artisans and create workshops a la Brother Velli's and support artisans in that way? Do you feel like that is authentic? Do you feel like that's problematic? Do you feel like, yeah, what are your thoughts on the above?
So yeah, now what's next for the Folklore? We are growing a lot, especially during this time with all of this support for Black designers and Black-owned companies. So we are, increasing the amount of products on the site. We're increasing the quantity of the styles that we have on the site. We're increasing the number of brands that we have on the site significantly for the autumn-winter season. Adding new categories in that we'll be announcing soon, and also establishing some major partnerships that we're really excited for the autumn winter 20. So there's been just a lot of growth, team growth as well, growing our team, refining our team, really, for the first 9 months of this business, I ran it by myself. So now having, a team that believes in the vision just as much as me has been, really rewarding. And we're also, doing what most startups do, raising capital, doing all that good stuff. So trying to get in some people's pockets, so to make them rich, us rich, brands rich.
Right.
I'm all about Black economic uplift and how that will significantly change our reality, and will give us that boost of social and political capital that we seek and that we deserve. And I do believe that Black designers should be, from the diaspora, should also be producing on the continent if they're not producing in their home, country. So there's absolutely no reason to be producing in China unless there's something that, people in Africa can't do for you. Sometimes it's harder. Sometimes at the beginning it might even be a little bit more costly, but I can't imagine it'd be too much. I do think that there's just a lack of connection between these worlds, and that's something that we're hoping to, foster in the coming years. Being able to connect, as these production facilities grow out and as skills training increase, we'll be able to connect these people from the diaspora with people on the continent, so that we're exchanging wealth between each other. At the end of the day, the Folklore is about creating economic opportunities for the continent and for Black people in general. People don't recognize how big apparel exports are for a country, and we recognize that. We see that there is a huge gap in the market. We're filling it, and we're doing it successfully, and we are just really appreciative of everybody who supports us and who's going to be supporting us going forward. So
thank you so much for spending the time talking to us. Be sure to support the Folklore, shop the Folklore. We'll have all of the links in the description. You can follow them on their socials and actually support them. Again, emphasizing on
open up your pockets.
Period. There's something for literally everyone on that site.
And there'll be a lot of new products that drop the first week of July. All throughout July, we have a lot of new drops because a lot of our stuff was stuck on the continent because of COVID, so we just got it out. So free our spring 2020 collection.
Amazing. Free my spring. I think the conversation we had with Amira was super enlightening.
Yeah.
Like, just to think about the amount of work that she's put in, and the fact that I think like a lot of these major stores could benefit from not taking her blueprint, but being invested in the wholesale component. Like, she's doing all of the hard work for you. You don't even have to try that hard. All of the brands on the site are super duper fly. You have every category covered, bunch of different countries covered. And I think shout outs to her for even making something like that, because God bless. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are some brands, African brands, that you're interested in right now that we can shine a light on?
So I love Mowalola.
Ooh, shout out. How do you say it?
Cool.
Honey, like that's how you know. What?
I'm gonna assume Mowalola because it's a Nigerian name. So I'm gonna
Okay.
assume that's how you say it.
Because I can say Mowalola, and that's clearly not it. Like, say it one more time for the people in the back.
Mowalola.
All right.
Mowalola, yeah.
Mowalola. Okay.
I think just everything is so cool. Like and I
She's
love
so
that.
cool.
Yeah, she's just so cool. And seeing the other stuff she does, like her shoots and kind of, I'm trying to remember what the theme of like her stuff is, but I feel like Western, like cowboy, futuristic
Her lookbooks
sexuality.
are just so cool. Like they're like always super high contrast, like
Yeah.
high flash. Like I don't know, there's something very like cool.
I was hoping I could get something in the Essence sale, but that did not pan out.
No.
But one day, that's my goal. One day. Orange culture is really cool.
I love Orange Culture. If you
Yeah.
guys are not familiar, Nigerian brand, Nigerian designer, queer Nigerian designer who's consistently pushing the boundaries on gender identity with his clothing. Like I've had the opportunity of working on a couple of his shows, and first of all, everybody that the Nigerians come out for Orange Culture. Like they support Orange Culture to no end. Like when he does castings for his male models, everybody in there knows each other, for one. And two, like it's like the most like joyful experience to just see that, oh my god, hey, like it's just so like I Nigerians are very close to my heart just because they're loud like Jamaicans are.
Yeah. That's so true.
Yeah, and all of these models are coming out to support this Nigerian man, and they're all, like there's something beautiful about that. And his clothing they're just seeing Black African men wearing like pink cowboy hats, like it's just cool to see all of the, first of all, I've never really met such a large amount of queer African men, and to see them exist in the world in their full queerness, like so fly. Like, and he's always choosing African stylists to work with, African, like, and it's not even like he's trying, like these are his friends, like, and I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed.
I think the next brand, Andrea Iyama, does bridal, swim, I think just women's wear. They're just really cool. I think they have like a signature like ruffle style that they do on their swim.
Oh, pretty.
Bridal is sick. Like the models are insane. Yeah, just everything.
We've talked about Thebe Magugu, who I'm obsessed with. Their last collection was sickening. If you haven't checked it out, just do a Google Thebe Magugu. It's gonna be in the description.
Okay.
I'm not gonna spell it out. William Okpo. Are they Nigerian? I don't know where they're Nigerian, right?
Yeah.
And I think they're two sisters. Beautiful. And William Akua, I believe, is their father's name.
Oh, okay.
They do really beautiful work as well. And there's like a plethora of others.
Yeah.
Brother Vellies isn't necessarily, Aurora James isn't of African descent, but she is a Black woman, and she's out here doing the work, making sure that using her privilege and her access to some of these like wider spaces to sort of like apply pressure with her. What is her initiative that she's doing? Like 15% of your shelf space in any of these major retailers should be dedicated to Black owned brands, which I think that should, we shouldn't even have to like, what, my G,
like
come on.
minimum.
What? Brother Vellies is still very much a brand that is made in Africa, and to my knowledge, she works with local artisans, local women, gives them jobs, and not exploiting them like H&M. You did. So like you can go to sleep
exactly, and not feel guilty about your purchases. So we will be putting like a list of brands, a list of publications that we found in our research that I didn't even know about. Mostly Instagram, but I think they do physical, some of them, but mostly Instagram, which is also really cool. They have cool visuals. All of them are very much focused on looking at Africa in the way that we've talked about. A list of retailers or places that you can go to kind of make sure that you're exposed to more African design as well, because sometimes it's just about like what comes up in your feed. Sometimes it's not even on purpose, but it just like you just don't see anything else.
So make sure you are following us on Instagram and on Twitter at Brainwash X Media. Everything that we discuss will be on our Instagram and on our Twitter feeds, and some of the links for some of the sources that we found and that we referenced here in this episode will be in the description box. So peep that. If you want to watch us, if you're listening to us right now, you want to see how cute we look, you can go on our YouTube and watch us there. And we will be back next month. We might start doing little baby bonus episodes and talk about little fun stuff individually, if that's something you guys would be interested in. But so be on the lookout for our next episode. What is our next episode going to be about, Akua?
I think we talked about sustainability, maybe.
I think we're going to be talking about sustainability in the real way, baby. None of that reformation junk I'll be trying
fabrics,
to push.
But
yes.
Ethics and people.
Ethics, all encompassing, baby 360.
Wow.
Holistic. Yes, so make sure, again, you follow us at Brainwash X Media across all social platforms. If you want to read some of our stories, you can find us on brainwash.media, and we have a newsletter that comes out weekly-ish, and the links to that will be in all of our social media bios. And if you want to watch us, or on YouTube's, everything, you can find us everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Period.
Perfect.
All right. Later.
Cool. Bye. Alrighty. Oh, am I still?